Today I'm out in Las Vegas, Nevada, taking a look at the EV that so many of you have been waiting for. This is the 2023 Kia EV6 GT. It completes the EV6 lineup and it gives Kia a solid direct competitor, I kid you not, to the high-performance alternatives from Tesla, namely the Model 3 and the Model Y. If you want to go 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds, there's now a Kia for you. Of course, this one has all-wheel drive and 576 horsepower. If that sounds kind of like a Ford Mustang Mach-E GT, you're kind of right, but this is better. For the high-output version of the EV6, Kia decided not to change the design formula too much. So the lower bumper definitely looks like the EV6 GT line, a little bit different than the Wind, but there are slight modifications. You notice a very slight tweak to the lower section of the bumper here. The headlights are the same, they're full LED reflectors. I wish they were a tiny bit brighter at night, but they are a very attractive look, and they have this really pinched-in nose there. This is a variant of the tiger nose design that we've seen in other Kias, but clearly modified for the EV6. Unquestionably, the EV6 is a stylish vehicle. I love the lines, but I think a bit more questionably, this is an electric crossover. You could compare this not just to the Model Y, but I think logically also a Model 3. Not just something like a Ford Mustang Mach-E, but also the upcoming Hyundai Ioniq 5 and 6. Because even though this does have a hatch, it's obviously more horizontal than it is vertical. It comes across as a really swoopy liftback, perhaps a bit of a crossover meets Kia Stinger vibe, which is certainly what was going on with the design of this. It has a very strong haunch back here in the rear, giving it a really nice look. But the roofline is on the low side. That is a consideration. It means that headroom is a little bit hampered inside because of the exterior design. The Tesla Model Y comes across as perhaps a little bit more crossover-like because it's a little bit more inflated as far as its roofline. It does, however, look like an overinflated Tesla Model 3. Just sort of like the Mustang Mach-E looks like a Mustang that was stung by a bee. But I think this comes across as a little bit more cohesive than either of those designs. As with the front-end design changes, the rear-end changes versus the GT line are relatively minor. We get GT badging, slightly different inserts in the bumper here, and then a slightly different treatment down there at the bottom of the bumper. But the rest of this is basically the same. Charging happens right back here, just sort of inside that taillight module. That's where you're going to find the standard J1772 charging connector and the CCS DC fast charge port. A surprising twist with the EV6 when it launched is that all versions get fairly wide tires. It starts in base trim with 235 width tires all the way around. The EV6 GT line gets 20-inch wheels and 255 width tires. This GT trim keeps the 255 width, bumps the wheel and tire up to a 21-inch wheel, so we get a little bit less cushion. And then, of course, on the inside, we get massive brake rotors and pretty big calipers there as well. These are sort of lime green colored front and rear, but interestingly, they're not Brembo brakes. This is likely in order to help reduce costs. So these appear to be an in-house design. They're not branded at all. The tire itself, that's a bigger change. These are Eagle F1 summer tires, so you get a lot more grip, but you do give up a decent amount of efficiency in the process. The GT and the GT line may look a lot alike, but under the skin there's some pretty big differences. The first thing Kia did was take the electric motor that we find in the all-wheel drive versions of the regular model and they tossed it in the front. Then they gave us an all-new electric motor in the back that's the most powerful motor the Hyundai Kia Group has ever put into an EV. 362 horsepower on just the rear wheels. Then they went a little bit further and they gave it an electronic limited slip differential on the back, something that you don't find until you're paying about 6 figures for your next new EV. So aside from this, it's really going to be something like a Porsche Taycan or a very limited number of alternatives. That gives this a really different feel out on a track or out on the road than something like a Tesla Model Y even, which is just about as fast, but doesn't have that limited slip functionality on the rear axle. Then, of course, we have that approximately 214 horsepower motor on the front, giving you a total of 576 ponies. Torque, that's slightly more modest at 545, and all of that is powered by the same lithium-ion battery pack that spans between the two axles. It's good for about 77 kilowatt hours. The battery pack itself is a little bit heavier than the one that we find in the regular version of the EV6. I suspect there have been some cooling tweaks, but Kia has been really cagey on the details. And I'm surprised by that because the performance figures for this vehicle are absolutely bonkers. 0 to 60, 3.4 seconds, and those are times I actually managed to get out here in Las Vegas, Nevada, and there were 2 people in the car. I suspect if I was just by myself in here, it'd be down there towards 3.3 seconds, and we were also testing that with a cold battery, so it really hadn't been driven, and the winter mode was not engaged. So right off the bat, excellent performance. Intriguingly, better performance than you will ever get in a Mach-E GT. Again, charging happens back here behind door number 1. It is a powered door. There's a button inside, and then you have to press on that little door in order to open it. There's a button to close it as well. I kind of wish there was a key fob button to make that a little bit easier. I could see that getting scratched over time. Now, when it comes to charging, 2 important things to keep in mind are that this is one of the fastest charging EVs in the world. It will go 10% to 80% in just 18 minutes. And yes, I have verified that myself. And the other thing to know is that range is not terribly good if you're taking a look at the GT model. You can get under 200 miles of real-world range. According to the EPA, this comes in just under 210. If you're in the advanced sporty modes, obviously that number is going to plop down there towards maybe 180. When this battery was completely full and we started the day, we put it immediately in the GT mode. It then estimated that you had 180 miles of range. That sounds believable. If you want better range, of course, there's the GT line. The all-wheel drive version is now rated for about 255 miles for 2023. If you get the wind version, which has narrower tires, you can go up to 280 some odd miles. And if you get the rear-wheel drive version, it's going to be a lot slower, but it will get you 310 miles of range. I also love the fact that the onboard AC charger is a 10.9 kilowatt unit. So if you have access to a higher amperage EVSE at home or at the office, this will definitely charge much faster than a lot of EVs out there that are still trundling along with about a 7 kilowatt charger. As we look around the interior, you should know that all GTs are going to come one way, fully loaded. So they're all going to have this moonroof here. It's a little bit larger than average. It has a powered shade. The controls are right here in this area, but all of them are going to, as a result, have limited front headroom, as I said before. Now, rear headroom is pretty generous. I have no complaints about that in my GT line. No difference for the GT versus GT line as far as the rear seats go. They recline. These have a little bit of a different upholstery treatment going on. You can see there with that faux suede, lots of stitching there, lots of contrasting piping going on in this interior as well. Soft touch inserts on the door panels in the back. That's kind of a nice touch. We also have matching ambient lighting back there. The front seats, they kind of look like a 5-point harness seat, but they're in fact not. It's just a regular shoulder belt adjustable over there on that side. The seats themselves look an awful lot like the Hyundai N seat that we find in a lot of their N products. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but it is interesting that these seats are not powered. They are heated, but not ventilated, and they are manual on the driver and front passenger side. So definitely a bit of a downgrade there versus the GT line, where we have power, ventilated, and heated front seats. Moving over to the front doors, we find more of that imitation suede insert going on there that really dresses the interior up versus the GT line. I wasn't expecting as many interior upgrades as we actually get here. Moving on to the dashboard, very similar treatment to the GT line with this kind of stripy stuff going on the dashboard. And then, of course, a green accent running right there across the dash. That is, again, kind of a cool touch there. If I open the glove compartment over here, apparently I can't find the button. We do have a combination bin and slot style glove compartment. I had no problem fitting larger computers inside. In the middle of the dashboard, we find the 12.3-inch touchscreen infotainment system that Kia has been known for a while. This is not completely over-the-air updatable, though. So if you are looking for a vehicle that does OTA updates top to bottom, this is not going to be the vehicle for you. Below that, we have my only complaint on the inside, which is this shared bank of controls for the infotainment and the climate control there. This is a LCD right here on this side, and then these are just touch buttons that change based on the mode. My complaint with this button bank is that every time I reach for the knob when I'm driving my own EV6, I end up finding that it's in the wrong mode. Possibly that's something that you would get used to. I have found that I just leave it in the climate control and I adjust the volume with the buttons on the steering wheel. We have a flat floor in the EV6, USB ports up front there. It is a little bit difficult to show because they're kind of far away. USB input for the infotainment system, and then a USB charge-only port, flat floor section right there, and then this large storage area right there under this large center console. You can see that from both sides. This is where we find the controls for the heated and seats and heated steering wheel. No ventilated seats, also no touch buttons here like you find in the GT line. I actually prefer the physical buttons, I have to say. Power button there, rotary shifter over here, button for the camera system. It has a 360-degree camera, auto brake hold. We also have the parking sensor enable disable button, Qi wireless charger, big cup holders, large storage console right there, and then more of that stripiness. On the driver's side, we have a few things you won't find on the competition. A full color heads-up display, a 12.3-inch LCD instrument cluster, and pedals on the back of the steering wheel. The LCD cluster is basically the same one that we find in other EV6 models. In this safety view, you can actually see little car icons moving around here on the road, very Tesla-like in that respect. We also have things like your trip computer readouts, turn-by-turn navigation directions, and vehicle power flow. It's not quite as snazzy as the LCDs that we find in modern Mercedes models, but remember, we are talking about a Kia that's a lot less expensive, and that is considerably bigger than the cluster that we find in the Mach-E, and of course the Model 3 and Model Y just don't have one at all. Moving out to the steering wheel, it's the same flat bottom design we've seen before, with one big change, this GT button here. I'll get to that in a moment. We have paddle shifters on the back like we find in the rest of the EV6 lineup, but they are regen paddles. I shouldn't say actually paddle shifters because they're regen paddles. You can see the status over there on the dash. It allows you to select between one pedal driving all the way to no throttle liftoff regen at all. On this side, we have the controls for the adaptive cruise control, that multifunction cluster, infotainment buttons over there, drive mode toggle, and the GT button here. This toggles you through the mainline modes, Eco, Normal, and Sport. This allows you to either select between the default GT mode, where we do get a little bit of a theme change on that LCD cluster. As you notice, it reduces the traction and stability control there as well. Or you can click the My Mode button, and then you can edit the mode in the infotainment system. My Mode is definitely important in the EV6 because the only two drive modes where you'll have full power from the electric motor system is in Sport Plus, and you will only get that Sport Plus motor profile in My Drive mode or in GT mode. Eco is going to give you relatively low power, so actually a little bit less than we find in the EV6 GT line, although performance was still pretty impressive. Normal and Sport give you over 400 horsepower, actually over 450, and then Sport Plus is where you're going to get all 576. Definitely something to keep in mind. Now it's time to get this out on the road. Probably the first thing you need to know is that, like many EVs, power output from the motors is going to change based on the drive mode. And you can change the drive mode with the buttons right down here on the steering wheel I showed you earlier. In Eco mode, it's going to produce 286 horsepower total, all-wheel drive, of course, with 2 electric motors. In Normal and Sport modes, that gets bumped up to 429 horsepower. If you want to access nearly 600 horsepower, you have to press this GT button right here, and then all of a sudden, we have 576 horsepower, and it will go 0 to 60 in under 3.4 seconds. This is definitely very, very quick. And it's still very quick, even if you're in the Normal mode. This still feels way peppier than the regular versions of the EV6 in Normal mode. And let's give Eco mode a try here. Let's see how this is. It definitely is going to dull things down a bit here in the Eco mode. Like the other all-wheel drive EV6s, when this vehicle is in its Eco mode, it's going to favor power to the rear axle. Like right now we're cruising along, just the rear electric motor is doing its thing. But unlike the rest of the all-wheel drive EV6s, if I floor it, the front electric motor is going to be doing something. It just doesn't ramp up its power as quickly as if I put this in Normal mode. And then of course, fortunately, Kia gives us a little display so you can see exactly what's going on there. And if I put this in the GT drive mode, it's going to basically use everything it's got all the time. And of course, it's going to make the throttle pedal pretty jumpy, so you get that immediate acceleration that you'd expect in an EV. This is a hoot and a half to drive, especially, of course, from a stop. Let's just go ahead and do that again here and see how this goes. It has pretty instant acceleration, and there's definitely some tire spin going on up front. Again, they've basically moved the rear electric motor from the normal EV6 up to the front. The regular EV6 can't spin its tires unless the surface is a little bit loose. This absolutely can because we get so much extra oomph. As with the regular EV6, we have paddles on the back of the steering wheel. Those allow you to run through the different regen braking modes. You can have a very aggressive one-pedal mode, or you can have essentially no regen braking at all. One interesting twist, though, with the EV6 lineup is that regen braking actually turns on in the level 0 in this vehicle. And in the rest of the EV6 lineup, for some reason, if it's at level 0, you get almost no regen braking. It basically turns it completely off. Here, they've tuned that software a little bit differently, and I think a little bit more intelligently as well. I don't have any 60 to 0 stopping distance scores, but I suspect this is going to stop shorter than the Mustang Mach-E GT because that has relatively skinny tires. It does have some really nice tires, though, on the performance version, and this one has Eagle F1s. I think that's kind of a weird choice for Kia to use for a summer tire. I really wish they'd gone for some Michelin Pilot Sports. The F1s, they're not bad tires, but they're just not quite as grippy as what we see out of some of the competition at the moment. That said, let's see how the braking feels. I'm actually very confident there, really nice all the way to the end. And I have to say that the blending between regen and friction braking is done very well in this vehicle. It definitely is done better than the average Toyota hybrid, which I think a lot of folks are really familiar with. And it is going to feel different than a Rivian or a Tesla because they don't do regen braking in this same way at all. In those vehicles, all you get is throttle lift-off regen. So you take your foot off the brake pedal, that deceleration that you get, that is all the regen braking you will ever get. It's based on the drive modes in the infotainment system. With this vehicle, when you put your foot on the brake pedal, it's going to start with the regen and it's going to start blending in the friction brakes as needed. So if you're out on the track or driving your favorite winding mountain road like this and you're putting your foot on the brakes, it doesn't mean that the brakes are overheating because of course it has that regeneration ability. It gives you a little bit more control and more of a typical car feel than you find in a Tesla or a Rivian, but not everybody is a fan of that. If that includes you, then you can just dial this up to the maximum for regen right there with the paddles and you can have that very similar experience. After having driven an EV6 myself for quite some time now, I was really interested in the ride quality of the EV6 GT, and I think that Kia has struck a really good balance here. This is firmer than the rest of the EV6 lineup, but not harsh, I would say. Even in GT mode, it's relatively comfortable out on this road, and of course it's going to soften up if I put it over here to normal. The suspension is adjustable in 3 different levels: Normal, Sport, and Sport Plus, and even Sport Plus is surprisingly comfortable. Sport Plus is what you're going to get natively in GT. You can then engage the My mode where things are adjustable. I can adjust the motor, the steering, the suspension, the E-limited slip differential. That's a really cool feature that we find here, and of course the stability control as well. I like the fact that we have this My mode option because I can choose, for instance, a comfortable suspension tune here, but I can choose Sport Plus motor for the maximum power output from the vehicle. And then you can combine that all with the most aggressive E-limited slip differential functionality in the back for lots of fun around the corners. When it comes to absolute grip numbers, clearly I don't have any good data for you, but I suspect this is going to handle better than the Mach-E GT. This is a little bit lighter. Some final curb weight details seem a little bit difficult to get on the Mach-E GT performance because Ford keeps adjusting their numbers. The most recent numbers I've seen put that just a little bit below 5,000 pounds. This is a little bit lighter, maybe about 210 pounds lighter, so not a huge difference. This is a bit heavier than the GT line because we have more standard equipment in here, and some of the things that we find in this vehicle are a little bit heavier. But the center of gravity is pretty low, and the tires are pretty wide, which has always intrigued me about the EV6. Even the EV6 GT line has tires that are 10 millimeters wider than the widest tire you can find on a Mach-E. That is a really interesting twist. I have no idea why Kia decided to go so aggressive on the tire size. I think it's clearly because they were planning for this model, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe you could squeeze slightly wider tires on here because it was already designed for 255s. You could certainly put grippier tires on here for sure. Because the tire size is essentially identical to the GT line version of the EV6, I suspect cabin noise scores are going to be pretty similar. Now, when it comes to efficiency, clearly there's no free lunch, and you are going to have to give up quite a bit if you want all the power that we find in this model. EPA range is under 210 miles. Actually, it's right around 205 miles, and in real-world driving, it's probably going to be more like 180, 190 miles, especially if you're having a lot of fun with your EV6 GT. For some folks, that's going to be a deal breaker, but if you don't mind DC fast charging, it might not be, because over a 400-mile road trip, it will still take you less time to get there in this than in a Mach-E because it charges so quickly. So you could deplete the battery and then charge completely full in about 43 to 45 minutes, or just go from 10% to 80% in 18 minutes. That's something that I've noticed time and time again in the EV6 that we've had as a long-term vehicle. DC fast charge times are very, very swift, especially if you want to completely fill the battery, which is going to be important when we're talking about a vehicle with just about a 200-mile range. But this is in the same sort of mile range as far as EV range goes as something like a Volvo XC40 Recharge or the C40 Recharge. So there are a decent number of higher performance EVs out there with this kind of range. If you want more, however, you will find greater range in the Mach-E GT. It has a much bigger battery. It is about 30 to 40% larger than this. You'll also find greater range in the Model Y. The Model Y really is focused on efficiency, and that performance version definitely has decent range, even though it doesn't quite hit its EPA numbers. Now, at this point, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, what is performance like once this battery drops below 70%? We're at 75% now, so hopefully I'll come back on and let you know, but right here at 75%, it is absolutely excellent. And I have to say, Kia has done a really good job at maintaining performance over a broader range of states of charge and battery performance characteristics. That's something that we've noticed in the GT line version of the EV6, and it seems to apply to this as well versus the Mach-E. I don't think it's truly a design flaw with the Mach-E. I suspect that Ford is being incredibly conservative with their battery. That really fits with their engineering ethos there. But with the Mach-E GT, repeated 0 to 60 runs start really slowing things down. You'll seriously notice that out on a track or out on an autocross course. This, we haven't been able to do that same kind of testing yet, but it does feel that at 75% battery charge, it doesn't have the same sort of limitations that I've noticed in the Mach-E and are pretty common in a lot of EVs. Now that said, when this battery gets down to 50% state of charge or 20% state of charge, clearly it's not going to get you under 3.4 seconds 0 to 60 anymore. But what I can do is do some back-to-back runs here, and let's just see what the power gauge tells us after a while. We'll see how this goes. This is like the most interesting vomit comet ever, trying to do this sort of thing, because you really chew up your battery very quickly with this kind of and it is strangely fun. Sophian's in the seat next to me. Hopefully Sophian's not getting car sick here doing this. And we're still getting 100% power out of the battery, which is interesting. We just shed 4% of the battery doing that. So this gives you kind of an idea of what you should expect out of the battery. Performance really is an interesting target for the EV6 GT in a way that I had not expected from Kia. Kia believes in the EV6 GT enough that they brought us out here to Las Vegas Motor Speedway. They had us play on an autocross course, we were able to do some 0 to 60 runs, and of course, drift the EV6 GT as well. That's one of the interesting twists. They have a drift mode, which is a little bit difficult in an EV, especially a dual motor EV, and Kia gets there with that big electric motor in the back. They basically turn off the one in the front, allow you to start your drift, and then if you want to end the drift, you start steering in a particular way, it will re-engage the front electric motor to help pull you out of the drift in a way that really other rear-biased vehicles simply can't, and it's all thanks to the electric motor systems here. But what's most impressive about the EV6 GT is the reliability of the 0 to 60 performance here. This is what I mean. If you're driving really any EV, this included, as the battery state of charge starts to decline, the amount of power you can pull out of the battery starts dropping as well. And that reduces your 0 to 60 run. So say a Tesla Model Y Performance or a Model X Plaid or something like that. It's only going to get the rated 0 to 60 time, usually at around 70% state of charge or above. Now let's run through our very preliminary testing done out here near Las Vegas. With one person in the vehicle, this ran 3.3 seconds 0 to 60 at 90% state of charge. That's absolutely fantastic. This was still running 3.4 seconds 0 to 60 with two people in the vehicle, all the way down to around 50% state of charge. That is absolutely incredible. Below about 50%, that's where things started to tail off. That's when we got 3.5 seconds 0 to 60, still very, very impressive. And even down at around 24%, we clocked, with two people in the vehicle, 3.9 seconds 0 to 60. So performance in here is incredibly, incredibly consistent. When you take a look at state of charge versus performance, this beats the Model Y Performance, this beats the Mach-E GT, and it really beats just about everything even approaching this in terms of MSRP. Even something like a Porsche Taycan, that does really, really well with performance, but even it is going to trail off a little bit more than this by the time you've gone down to about 30% state of charge. That is probably the most impressive thing about this. Now, as far as the rest of the on-the-track feel goes, keep in mind this is a 3,800-pound electric crossover. It's not as high off the ground as the average crossover, but it's still pretty heavy. And even though we have 255 with summer tires on it, I kind of wish Kia had maybe given it some Michelin Pilot Sports. I think that would have improved the grip just a little bit more. But the tires are already pretty wide, so this out on an autocross course is honestly more impressive than the Mach-E GT Performance. I remember that event very distinctly because I didn't see as much of a difference as I had expected between my regular Mach-E and the Mach-E GT Performance out on an autocross course, especially if you're using unbridled extend mode in that Mach-E GT. That's what Ford says gives you consistent performance out on an autocross course, not maximum performance. If you use that mode, it actually is very, very similar to the regular dual motor version of the Mach-E. This has an entirely different personality pretty much all the time. The only time this is going to be slower than the GT line version is when you either put it in eco mode or when your battery pack is really, really low. And I'm probably talking turtle mode down at around 1% or so. because even at low states of charge, this is still going to be faster than average. And that's what's really interesting about this. It's clear in the regular version, the GT line version, that battery pack is capable of so much more. Hence, this level of performance and this battery pack. Because in mine, I will still run consistent 0 to 60 runs all the way from 90% state of charge down to around 15% state of charge. Now that makes sense because this battery pack was designed for the GT to exist right from the very beginning. If you want to get your hands on the new EV6 GT, now's the time to reach out to your Kia dealer. There's probably a wait list starting, and they're going to be bringing about 2,000 to 2,500 units to America for the first model year. So if you want one, now is the time to reach out. You won't need pockets quite as deep as the other performance alternatives in the US, though. This will top out at $61,400 plus an approximately $1,300 destination charge. That is significantly less expensive than a Mustang Mach-E GT Performance or a Model Y Performance. Remember that in order to get 3.4 seconds 0 to 60, we're talking about a relatively narrow set of competitors. We're talking fastest Model 3, fastest Model Y, some really expensive luxury vehicles like a Porsche Taycan GTS that actually is a tiny bit slower in its base form than the EV6 GT. And no version of the Mach-E GT will get you to 0 to 60 this quickly, which is an interesting and unexpected twist. I really had expected this to be kind of the same performance conundrum that we've seen in the Mach-E. The Mach-E's numbers look really good, but in real-world testing, I don't know anybody that has actually achieved Ford's numbers for that vehicle. So really, when it comes to meeting Tesla head-on with performance, this is the first vehicle that has a lower price tag and actually similar performance to the Tesla. Obviously slightly shorter range, but when it comes to that Tesla comparison, this has some advantages. That E-limited slip rear differential there is definitely an advantage, and relatively good efficiency on this model as well. If you want to go further on a charge, obviously the Model Y will do that, however, but it's not going to charge as quick. So depending on the kind of road trip you want to take, you could stop every, say, 150 miles for 10-15 minutes, and you actually may stop less in terms of total time to go 500 miles than you would in a Tesla Model Y. It all depends on your trip profile and how much charging you're willing to do. Any way you slice it, though, this is definitely going to charge significantly faster than the Mach-E. The Mach-E is definitely on the slow side for charging. Now, the reason I keep talking about these two options, Mach-E and Model Y, is that they're the two best-selling EVs in America, and depending on the month we're talking about, EV6 has actually come in third. What surprised me the most about the EV6 GT today is its consistency in performance delivery. 0 to 60 at 3.4 seconds didn't just happen at 100% state of charge, or 90, or 80, or 70% state of charge, which are basically the charge levels where a Mach-E GT will give you its rated performance. It also happened at 60% and even at 55% state of charge. When this got down below 50% state of charge, it was running 3.5 seconds 0 to 60, so only a hair slower. And it did that consistently, back to back to back. When the charge level dropped all the way down to 25%, this slowed down to 3.9 seconds 0 to 60, which is, interestingly enough, about as fast as a Mach-E GT will ever get you 0 to 60, even when it is 100% charged. So the performance curve on this vehicle relative to state of charge is much more consistent than we find in a huge number of EVs, from really expensive luxury EVs to benchmark EVs like a Tesla Model Y or Tesla Model 3. That is incredibly impressive. I don't know exactly what Kia's secret sauce here is. It likely has something to do with the 800-volt architecture, though, because the battery voltage is much higher than average in this segment. Remember, Mach-E and Model Y are 400-volt nominal EVs. It could be that it's just easier to keep a consistent voltage going to the electric motors for that level of performance. Obviously, cooling is a big factor here as well, and that's likely why the battery pack in this is slightly heavier than in a regular EV6. It probably has some cooling tweaks inside, but even driving this hard out on a track, the air conditioning system didn't really seem to be working hard, so clearly cooling is done incredibly well. Let me know what you think about all that, and what would you pick if your own cash were on the line. This could be at least $10,000 less expensive than a Mach-E GT Performance. The back seat is not going to be quite as comfy, and that will give you a bit more cargo area. The Model Y will give you an optional third row, and of course all the advantages of the Tesla charging network, but neither of those will charge faster than this, and neither one is going to be a consistent performer as this. So let me know down there in the comment section, what would you pick and why? And of course, check out the related videos on Auto Buyer's Guide, Alex on Autos, and here on EV Buyer's Guide as well. You can also head over to the merch store at aoamerch.com, find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social places, and I'll see all of you next week.